This is Pastor Ryan Cheng. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I would like to talk about climate change. This is a very important topic that as Christians, we really have not discussed that much. I learned during the COVID season that many people expect to hear only from those who specialize in, for example, in virology or in immunology. So I understand that. However, even though I am not a climate scientist, I will address this issue because it's a matter of research. And I'm going to limit myself to certain issues so that I don't speak as if I am a climatologist. I've done two major research in my life at major university and a major seminary. So I do believe that I know how to research. So I'm going to put that to the test, talking about this very important issue. Okay? Now, climate change, a.k.a. global warming. What is it, and is it true? Now, let's begin with solar energy from the sun. When the solar energy is absorbed at the surface level of the earth that radiates into heat, does that make the earth very warm and toasty? And the answer is, actually, it does not. If there's nothing else, then earth will be below freezing. Why? Well, earth needs something like blanket to keep the heat. Otherwise, it will lose all that solar energy that radiates into heat. Well, that blanket is called greenhouse effect. It is natural. It is something that God created, and it is made up of three natural gases: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And the function of the greenhouse effect is to control the flow of heat. Some heat will escape into space, while other heat will return back to Earth's surface, thereby warming up Earth, keeping it about 15 degrees Celsius. Again, this is God's intelligent design of the Earth. So, greenhouse effect is natural. We need it to keep the temperature at optimal level so that life can flourish. However, after Industrial Revolution and the usage of fossil fuel, three in particular, oil, natural gas, and coal, it began to produce excessive carbon dioxide. And that is emitted into the atmosphere and ends up keeping more heat than before. So as you see in the diagram, additional heat that's entrapped in the Earth's atmosphere is making the Earth more warmer. Thus, climate change, global warming. We've seen pictures of ice melting and sea level rising, and thus, this is what concerns a lot of people about the future of the Earth as a result of carbon dioxide emitted mainly from burning of the fossil fuel. In 2019, Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman from New York, and also Ed Markey, a senator from Massachusetts, they co-authored a House resolution which is known as a Green New Deal. I read the whole thing a couple of times. In one section, they talk about potential dangers, real consequences to the Earth because of climate change. And one was more than 350 million people to be exposed globally to deadly heat stress by 2050. So this is very alarming. And they listed other damages, very dangerous damages that could happen to this Earth if we don't get control of the man-made greenhouse effect, which is called anthropogenic, which is man-made as opposed to naturally made by God. But isn't it true that, and this is from the Royal Society, Fellowship of Preeminent Scientists in Great Britain, it says climate is always changing, it's part of nature. Yes. Ironically, I got to read something very interesting in one of our AMI Quiet Time blogs. After reading it, I titled this AMI Quiet Time blog as Some Factors Behind Climate Change, Edward Harchin. The pastor who wrote this blog did not mean to write about climate change, but he mentioned a earth-shattering event that happened in 19th century as a way to explain about heart change. I want to read that portion. He said this: The worst eruption of a volcano took place in 1816 in Indonesia, claiming the lives of 92,000 people. The volcano itself was reduced from 13,000 feet to 9,000 feet. 1816 became known as the year without summer. Why? Because the ash in the atmosphere reduced the temperature, which was felt worldwide, not just in Indonesia. Interestingly, it is thought that an additional 100,000 people may have died from crop failures as far as Europe and America due to the decrease in temperatures from the eruption. So it was a case of low temperature that caused great disaster, human disaster. So yes, climate does affect life. So I'm referring to this event to show that climate change was not anthropogenic. It was not man-made. It was very natural. After all, to the extent that multiple ice ages occurred in the past, they were all caused not by man, but by nature. So we know that climate changes not by man, but by nature. But the Royal Society also said, why is climate change of concern now? Why? Because of the 97% consensus. It's anthropogenic, man-made, this 97% consensus says. The Royal Academy wrote, the speed of the current climate change is faster than most of the past events. It is moving very fast, and the level of carbon dioxide might be double by the end of this century as opposed to the level of mid-19th century, and it spells a disaster, according to prominent scientists. Now, President Obama, in 2013 tweet, based on that 97% consensus, wrote, 97% of scientists agree climate change is real, man-made, and dangerous. Now, that tweet is actually based on a 2013 study by a guy named John Cook. I think he's a psychologist because he got a PhD in the cognitive psychology of climate science denial. So he studied people who say that climate change is not true. Well, this is what he did. He examined the abstracts of nearly 12,000 peer-reviewed scientific literature to see whether the authors thought that there is a climate change. This is what he found out. In the abstracts of nearly 12,000 peer-reviewed scientific literature on anthropogenic global warming, no position taken. 2/3 of the people didn't take any position on anthropogenic global warming. 2/3 didn't take any position. Those who said yes to anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming, only 1/3, less than 1/3 said yes, there's a global warming, man-made. Those who said no was less than 1%. And then those who said we're not very sure, also less than 1% at 0.3. So where did John Cook get the number 97%? Look, yes to anthropogenic global warming is actually 97% of the 33.6% of the literature reviewed, which makes up 32.6%. It was actually 1/3 of nearly 12,000 peer-reviewed scientific literature that said that it is man-made climate change. Not 97%, but 32.6%. When I read this, I go, you can't do statistics like that. But he didn't stop there. Somehow he contacted authors of these papers and asked them, rate your own paper. And those who did respond, this time, number of people who did not take any position went down to 36%. So the rest of them took position, and out of those people, 97% said that yes, it is man-made. So the number went up. In other words, yes to anthropogenic global warming, when the author John Cook asked the authors of these literatures, it was about 2/3, which is pretty significant, but not 97%. Now, David Legates is climatologist. He was former Delaware State climatologist. In 2016, he reviewed John Cook's study and made these comments after doing his own research. He said, only 41 abstract, 0.3%, endorse anthropogenic global warming or climate change. In other words, if you're looking for those scientists who will say that it is all man, no nature, he only found 41 who actually would say that. The rest of them will account for human contribution, maybe a lot, but they also account for natural factors. He said, what is a real figure? We may never know. And then he said, scientists who disagree with the supposed consensus. What consensus? That climate change is man-made and dangerous, like all man-made, not mentioning anything from nature, find themselves under constant attack, bullied, canceled. It had become politicized, just like COVID vaccine. One study that stood out for me, however, was done by a retired energy executive. He looked at the same study by John Cook, and I won't give you detail on his methodology. However, he did say in this article entitled Fact-Checking the Claim of 97% Consensus on Anthropogenic Climate Change, yes to those who said anthropogenic global warming, his figure was 80%, not 97%, which is surprising because he was a retired energy executive. He said, even though belief is clearly below 97%, support over 80% is strong consensus. Yes, I think number speak for itself. 97% is incredible, but 80% is still good, leaning toward, yes, it is anthropogenic climate change. Now, is it all man or no nature? That he didn't specify. So is that a problem? Based on my research, yes. At the very least, much of that has to do with man, anthropogenic, but you cannot ignore the part the nature plays. Those who ignore that, I would say, is not doing justice to science. A big one? Is this really a big problem? Many, but not all, seem to agree. I found three in particular: Richard Lindzen, atmospheric physicist from MIT; Bjorn Lomborg wrote an important book. He's a Danish scholar, also David Legates. So they would agree saying that those who say big problem, radical solution required, hey, you guys are climate alarmists. Your cure is worse than the disease. Of course, those who promote this is a big problem will say we disagree. And those people who disagree, that's great. You should disagree if you disagree, right? That's science. But many have gone beyond just disagreeing. They went into the mode of bullying, censoring, threatening. That's not what we want, especially when we're talking about science. Is this the corruption of the natural order biblically plausible? I think so. Corruption of nature is talked about in Romans 8:21. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it. I could read it like this. I'm talking just about greenhouse effect, which God created to make sure that the temperature of the earth is about 15 degrees Celsius, very optimal for life. For the greenhouse effect was subjected to too much carbon dioxide, not by its own choice, but by the will of one who subjected it. I'm not against using fossil fuel, but those who abuse it, who don't care about the environment, yes, they could be adding much more carbon dioxide than it has to be, which is causing more heat to be trapped so that Earth is getting warmer and warmer along with natural factors. So I think Romans 8:21 can be used in that sense. Well, should Bible-believing Christians care? What do you mean? I mean, after all, 2 Peter 3:12-13 said, that day, God's judgment day, his return, that day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat. But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and new earth. So why should we care? The earth will be destroyed by fire, and there'll be a new heaven and new earth. So should we care? I think, yes, we should care. Psalm 65 verse 9 said, you, God, care for the land and water it. You enrich it abundantly. The streams of God are filled with water. Why? Why does God do this? to provide the people with grain. For so you have ordained it, so that we could eat, not just for us, but for generations to come as well. So stewardship of earth is biblically mandated, for it produces grain, food, not just for us, for future generations as well. So we shouldn't have the attitude of King Hezekiah when he was told that God was going to judge his nation because of him and his predecessors. He said, will there not be peace and security in my lifetime? Who cares? You know, it's happened to those people after I die. No, we don't want that kind of attitude. We should care what goes on this earth, even though one day everything will be burned. When? I don't know. It could be another 1,000 years. We shouldn't imitate the attitude of King Hezekiah, who didn't care because he wasn't going to be around when disaster struck. So what should we do? Now, Paris Accord 2015 gathered the leaders of almost 200 nations, and they agreed on this. We must lower the global temperature by 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius above the level of the pre-industrial era. That was the agreement. Their goal is to reach net zero carbon emission by 2050. They want to provide ways to cut down carbon emission and to neutralize it so that there will be net zero carbon emission by 2050. And they think they can do that by lowering the global temperature to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius above the level of pre-industrial era in the 19th century. Now, I think we should agree with that, but how matters. How are we going to do that? How are we going to reach that point of net zero carbon emission by 2050? I already told you about the House resolution proposed by Ed Markey and Ocasio-Cortez, recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal. So, is that the solution? Is that how we're going to reach net zero carbon emission by year 2050? I say, no, it is a fantasy. What they propose is just a fantasy. Now, what I'm about to read was hinted, but actually was not in the resolution. But following that, Ocasio-Cortez office released a FAQ, frequently asked questions, to the press, and there they amplify what they meant. For example, they wrote this: building out high-speed rail at a scale where air travel stopped becoming necessary. That's fantasy. How do I get to my destination way over there from here? That's pure fantasy. I'm a Christian. I'm a realist. We practice reasonable faith. This is blind faith. Furthermore, she wrote, create affordable public transit available to all with goal to replace every combustion engine vehicle. Great. I think we should really work on expanding public transportation. But don't you know, many people need to drive to get to a train station. You want to get rid of every vehicle that use fossil fuel? That's pure fantasy. And that is not how people in developing nations live. They don't live like that. That's Vietnam. I've been to that country 20 times. The way of life there, the way of transportation is moped. Millions of them. Every year I go there, there are more. How do you change that? It is terrible to their skin, their lungs, so they wear masks and covering. They should do something, but to get rid of every single moped in Vietnam, I don't see that happening. That's way of life over there in Vietnam and other nations who don't live like people in America. Also, her resolution really is about something else. Green New Deal looks like it's about environment and climate change, but actually it is not. It's a Trojan horse. Let me give you one example. In their FAQ, it says guaranteeing economic security to all who are unable or unwilling to work. What? That is not even communism, because in communism you have to work. It's just that you get the same no matter how much you work, but here they want to reward people for not working. The scripture has something to say about that. If a man will not work, he shall not eat. 2 Thessalonians 3:10. So it looks like it's about environment and climate change, but through that door, back door, something else is brought in. No, a lot of empty promises followed by indifference. From the Green New Deal resolution, it says this: prioritizing high-quality job creation and economic benefits in vulnerable communities that may otherwise struggle with the transition away from greenhouse gas intensive industries like people who work in oil. Great! But the first opportunity to show that they mean business when President Biden, well, let me read from January edition of Newsweek, a mainstream media, over 1,000 jobs cut by company building Keystone XL pipeline after Biden ends project. There was no help for these people. These are middle-income Americans who have families and houses. They just lost jobs overnight because new president decided that we're going to get rid of this pipeline. But what about the people? Do they matter? You know, I was visiting Texas last month, and I had a chance to eat dinner with this person who lives in Texas. He is into natural gas. He tests equipment for discovering natural gas. So I asked him, so are you still able to do your business? He said, for now. But they're nervous. This is how they make their living. And he mentioned that, natural gas is actually cleaner energy, cleaner than oil and coal. It doesn't matter though. So if the government says we're going to help you, but the first opportunity to show that they're going to help them to transition away from greenhouse gas intensive industry, what I saw was indifference. Who cares? Suggestion and reminder. What do? Urge and pray for our leaders to govern with urgency, but with common sense. Common sense. And without hypocrisy. Don't give us fantasy, unrealistic fantasy that's not really going to work, period. John Kerry, when he was asked, well, you are a climate czar, but you travel in private jet that emits even more carbon dioxide. So what's up with that? And John Kerry said, the only choice for someone like me who does what I do. That's the epitome of hypocrisy. You know what that is? That's white rich man's privilege. Suggestion and reminder, in everyday life, implement actions friendly to ecosystem and environment. That's what we can do. There are a lot of things that are not under our control, but we can pick up trash. Our church, we go there once a month and pick up trash, make our neighborhood, cleaner. Do you recycle? Yeah, and also we should use public transit as often as we can. For the last 11 years, I've been going to New York City from where I live about 5-6 times a year. And it's a 12-hour drive, and I've driven a couple times, but I usually take bus or train. Now, it's cheaper. I don't pay for toll, gas, but also it's good for the environment. And if there are 30 people going to New York from my city, that's 30 less cars. It's good for the environment. So those are some of the things we can do that is friendly to ecosystem and the environment. Lastly, remember that our ultimate commitment is to God's kingdom, not to this earth. Keeping earth cool is not my reason for being. It's important, but that's not the first thing for us. We are committed to God's kingdom. Environment is important, but the earth will one day perish when God renews all things. That is where our hope lies. God will renew all things, and we want to be there in new heaven and new earth. We look forward to that day. So even as you care about environment, care about the souls of people. And only way we can be part of that new heaven and new earth is by being born again, by believing in Jesus Christ. So even as you care about this earth, care about the souls of people, preach to Jesus Christ. He paid for the penalty of our sin by believing in him and what he did on the cross. We are forgiven of our sins and given eternal life as a free gift.